Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this fourth episode of our Nest Builders event. I want to go ahead and first and foremost, as we always do, just extend a special warm welcome to our Nest families. We are so happy to have you attending here with us, and certainly the opportunity to care for, love, nurture, and educate your young children. It really means a lot to all of us here. So thank you so much for attending and for being a part of this Nest family. I am really excited because tonight we're going to welcome back our friends from Zest Pediatrics. One of them's a familiar face, Dr. Michael Parisa. And then we've got a new face on here with us tonight, Dr. Megan Lynch-Luby. Welcome, doctors, and thank you both for joining me tonight.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us again. We really appreciate being a part of this.
Yes, excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we dive into this topic, which I am very excited about, I want to just give you both an opportunity to introduce yourselves, tell the viewers a little bit about who you are and what you do at Zest Pediatrics. So Dr. Parisa, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sounds great. So my name is Dr. Mike Parisa. I was born and raised in Northeast Ohio. I am now practicing as a pediatrician with Zest Pediatrics in Solon, Ohio. So it's a little bit southeast of Cleveland. I have two beautiful children, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. The 2-year-old is sick, so you might hear her coughing in the background, but we will get through it together, such as daycare and childcare life. I absolutely love what I do, and I am very happy to be a part of Zest Pediatrics and then be able to help out with the Nest schools as well too.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah. Dr. Lynch-Luby, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Dr. Megan Lynch-Luby. I, as well, am a pediatrician with Zest Pediatrics. I am in the Westlake location, which is west of Cleveland. I also love what I do. I've been a pediatrician for about 9 years now and with Zest for going on 1 year, and it's been awesome. It's a really fun way to practice. I, as well, grew up in Northeast Ohio and stayed here. I have 2 kids. One is 4 and one is 2. So a lot of what we were talking about today is very pertinent to my everyday life. And I have one that was just sick and is getting over it. So Mike and I are living parallel lives right now.
I'm sure as many of us as parents watching tonight are as we head into this fall, winter, and cold season here. Thank you both so much for taking a minute to just introduce yourselves. I want to dive right into tonight's discussion, which is a fun one, I think. It is all about the second year of life. And I myself am a few years out of that, but I remember the second year for both of my girls quite fondly. And so I'm really excited to just dive into some of those key aspects of big changes of development that are happening here. The first is really that communication development, right? Their language really takes off in this second year of life. I feel like I remember I woke up one day and they were just talking sentences all around me. They're talking, they're babbling, they're really trying to communicate different things to us as parents, certainly as educators. Dr. Parisa, can you talk with us a little bit about some of the things that we as parents and teachers can help do or promote to really strengthen that development, those communication skills?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Danielle. And I think you bridged this topic absolutely perfectly because it does seem like almost suddenly right overnight, right? All of a sudden your kids can understand so much and they're starting to say so much more than they used to. As much as this can serve as a reminder to us to make sure we're monitoring our language, to make sure that our kids aren't saying things that we don't want them to say, there are some things that we can be doing to really help foster their communication development. So at the beginning of that second year of life, so around 12 months or so, your child might go from just having a handful of words towards the end of their second year of life, 24 months or so, they're up to about 50 normally, putting 2-word sentences together by the time their second birthday rolls around. So there isn't necessarily anything we need to teach our children. So much of what they learn with their language development is just going to be picked up from our kind of day-to-day life, everyday interactions, reading to them, singing to them, playing with them. But it's a good transition in a sort of a way for us to think about maybe transitioning away from some of that baby talk that's so cute when they're younger, calling tootsies or piggies for toes. Try focusing now on speaking more clearly and naming things correctly for them as they're trying to learn these concepts so that they can cement them into their language development moving forward. making sure that we're trying to respond immediately and positively to their attempts to communicate with words and gestures. Again, giving them that positive feedback to enforce in them, yes, this is something that I'm proud of you for doing, and I want you to do more of it. I think it can be hard sometimes when our child is pointing to get our attention, or they're tantruming to get our attention, pulling on our sleeves. We might know what they want. As much as you can, try and have some patience there, and try and have them vocalize, or vocalize to them. So for example, ask them, are you hungry? Do you want more milk? Yes or no? Try and get them to vocalize something so that it helps with their development. Even though it's so much faster for us just to give them what they want. But again, that's going to take a little patience on our end. Making sure that we're praising the type of responses that we're looking for in our children when they're using their words. So, great job asking for more juice there. Thank you for asking for more cheese. Thank you for using your words there. Play is a fantastic way also to help with this building communication skills, both verbal and nonverbal. So simply just rolling a ball back and forth can be a great way for your child to practice that verbal turn taking, displaying, dictating your play. So good job pushing that ball back to me, or nice catch with the ball. Really just trying narrating their play. So much of what they're doing, they see the dog that they're playing with on the puzzle. You're really helping connect the dots there for them, so they're visually seeing something to the name of what it is. When your child uses incorrect language or mispronounces something, it's going to happen. Repeat that phrase or statement with them with the correct words back in it. When they start to use simple combination words, maybe like ball down or light off, try repeating it. So the ball went down the slide, or the light just turned off. Just to, again, try and give them a little bit more of what they are already seeing and knowing, but just to try and develop that language a little bit more. I think back to something that I had stated in our first time together. Your child is going to develop on their own timeline. It is so hard not to compare amongst siblings, amongst what you're seeing on social media with your friends. You are your child's best advocate, right? Like, if you're concerned about their development, make sure you continue raising your concerns to your pediatrician until you're hearing answers that you like. But again, give them some time and patience. There are definitely some red flags that we would think about it and see in the office if we're worried. But again, they're following their own timeline. So do your best not to compare. It's going to drive you crazy.
It sure will. And it's especially hard when you've got sibling pairs in the mix. Dr. Lynch-Luby, is there anything else you want to add into that, just really on the topic of helping to develop that newfound communication and language there?
I think Mike really described everything. I think the most important thing we can do for our kids is model appropriate language, appropriate behaviors, reading, talking, singing, narrating your day. I tell my parents, talk till you're tired of hearing your own voice, because it's so good for them, because it's going to help their language development so much. And keeping in mind that development is a spectrum, and everybody's going to develop on their own timeline. And I totally agree with what Mike said.
Great, thank you. I'm going to build one question off of this here. I think there's a lot out there on American Sign Language, especially those core signs, right? Those ones that can really help meet some of those immediate needs, milk and water and more and all done, things like that. Do you all, from your perspective, what sort of benefit do you see from that in parents really exposing their children to some of those core signs?
Yeah, I absolutely love it. I hadn't really thought about it until my kids were in the childcare setting, but giving them a tool to then demonstrate to us what they want, and for us to be able to understand that was crucial, because it cuts down on their frustration. It starts, again, some of that back and forth for us in turn taking, and them coming up to us and demonstrating a need, but then us understanding what that need is. So I am absolutely all for it, and so happy that a lot of our childcare settings have kind of incorporated that into some of the early childcare settings.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you so much. We're pushing into one of my favorite things that we do here on Nest Builders, which is an opportunity to hear from the people that are watching with a little poll. So I'm going to go ahead and share a question, and then anybody viewing from Facebook or YouTube, you can go ahead and put your response into the comments, and we'll let those come in as we dive into the next topic, which is meal times and perhaps maybe some picky eaters during this second year of life here. But my question here for our viewers is, what is the biggest mealtime challenge you currently face with your toddler? So again, give you guys a few minutes to just put some comments in there, and we'll certainly pick a few and talk a little bit more about them. But as we wait for those to come in, I want to go ahead and dive into this topic with you, Dr. Lynch-Luby. I think it's a hot one. I know it's one that I certainly struggled with as a parent, right? Really expanding your child's food variety. How important is it for a child to eat a variety of foods?
It's very important. Nutrition has a lot to do with, how we develop, how our immune system develops, our digestive tract, pretty much everything. But also keep in mind, don't be upset if your kiddo doesn't eat a ton of foods at first. Kids have a natural predisposition to not liking new things. We call it neophobia. And it takes about 10 to 15 exposures to something for them to really develop a like or a dislike of a food. So keep offering things, keep offering different textures, the same food in different ways, prepared with things, prepared by itself, because that's really going to help them develop a good taste for healthy, good variety of foods.
Absolutely. Now, I know you mentioned continue to offer, right? Continue to offer it even if at first they're not trying it. What are some other good mealtime practices that we as parents, certainly as educators, can try with young children to really encourage them to be a little bit more bold maybe in their in the foods and the variety that they eat?
So even at a young age, even at this age, making them a part of preparing meals, a part of grocery shopping, a part of, pouring in the ingredients, just making them a part of it can make them a lot more interested in things, and make them a little bit more excited to try things. Making meal, we eat socially. So making meals a social time and sitting down and having conversation and making it fun. And again, modeling those good eating behaviors. If we're eating it, they're much more likely to eat it. I'm sure everybody's had that experience where they don't want it on their plate, but they want it on your plate. It's the same food, but it's better when it's from mom or dad's plate. So modeling good eating behaviors is going to help them want to try more variety of foods too.
Absolutely. All right, we've got a couple of challenges that I want to open up for discussion from either one of you. So whoever wants to weigh in. The first one is throwing food. How do we handle that? How do we handle throwing foods during meal times?
Yeah, and I think that goes into sort of any sort of reaction we're seeing from our kids. How are we responding to that? As much as you can, try and check your emotions. It's going to be hard, right? When you see your kid throwing something and it's making a huge mess, try not to give them too much of a response. Again, as kids are learning, developing these patterns, sometimes they'll do something just because they know they can get a response. They're not bad. That's just kind of what they're learning. They're like, oh my gosh, look what I can do in their own little mind. So as flat as you can, just try and redirect them. Say, no, we don't throw food. Again, taking it away for a certain period of time, whatever you decide, can be helpful. And then kind of reintroducing it to them once they've kind of calmed themselves down a little bit. But do your best to really just as flatly as you can, just say, no, this isn't something that we do, or try and redirect too. That can be helpful.
Absolutely. Yes. Oftentimes they're looking for that reaction. That's the exciting part, right?
Yeah.
How about textures? So like aversions to different textures of foods.
So again, I think it's that repeated exposure that can help. I mean, if they've had it 5, 10, 15 times and they still just don't like that texture, they probably don't like it. But if you have carrots, you can mash them, you can steam them, you can bake them, you can make them into different textures and continue to offer those things. There are some kids who just won't eat slimy things, who won't eat, my daughter doesn't like cooked vegetables. She eats raw vegetables fine, but she will not eat cooked vegetables. So sometimes it just develops a dislike and you just have to go with it. But continue, especially in this age group of 12 to 24 months, continue to offer and give them the same food in different ways, which is going to help them tolerate it more.
Yeah, sure. So let me ask you this. On the topic of textures or like aversions, is there ever a point where we should be concerned, right? Is there ever a point where, if it's seemingly every texture or every way you try to give a certain food or several group things, is there a point where parents should be worried or be addressing that a little bit further?
When it's just a food, like if it's just one certain texture of foods that they're having an aversion to, I wouldn't be super worried. If that is with, some developmental delays and some social concerns, if there's a cluster of things, it may be something that you want to look into, consider some therapies to help them. Occupational therapists do amazing things with kids to help with feeding aversions. Especially, if they're interfering with their nutrition and their growth and how much they're getting, then it's something that we need to address. But if it's just that alone and they're otherwise getting good nutrition, it's nothing I would be overly concerned about.
Yeah, and I think that's a good sort of thought with anything with children is in isolation, one incident or issue by itself, it's really hard to put a label to something. It's really looking at the child from a, whole child perspective, right? If it's just one isolated thing, again, often we tend not to worry too much about it, but still bring it up to your pediatrician.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last one here that we got is really on this topic of eating all of the food groups, right? If you've got a particularly picky child, right, who, as parents, you might genuinely struggle getting them to eat all of the food groups. What are some of your tips and tricks? How do we get that done?
It's tricky. Again, offering. So I typically recommend, just in general, is offer them one food that you know that they're going to eat, and then offer the rest of what you make for a meal. So that way, they're going to eat something, and hopefully they're going to try some other foods to increase the variety that they're taking. Sauces and dips, and I can't think of the other thing I was thinking of. Sauces and dips are a great way to add in hidden vegetables and mix things up. Smoothies are great too, because that way it'll get them the nutrition, but it might be hidden, but continue to offer that whole fruit or vegetable because we want them to develop a taste for that food too. But it's amazing how kids love to dip. So if you give them something to dip that lovely pepper in or cracker in, they'll be much more likely to eat it.
Take that whole spoonful of ketchup and just eat the whole thing. Right?
My 5-year-old right now, it's her favorite. She says, "Mommy, I just like to eat ketchup." And I'm like, okay. But yes, dips on everything. I mean, even both my girls, 5 and 7, we have to have, but I'm like that still to this day. Like anything we have, I'm like, okay, where's the dip? Like, what am I going to dip this in? So perhaps it's a learned behavior that they have. Any worries? So I'm going to ask, I know we're talking about the second year of life, but as children get older, and I know this is something that I've personally experienced, my 7-year-old loves to say to me, "Mommy, did you know your taste buds change every so often? So now I don't like that anymore." And I'm like, isn't that convenient? Anything that you would change in the advice that you've given us as they get older and maybe we start facing some of those challenges?
No, and it's amazing too how children can create a narrative to explain their specific action that you're seeing right now. To my 4-year-old's the exact same way right now. Loves turkey or whatever it is one day, the next day, "Oh, Daddy, I don't like that." Like, really? You ate 5 pounds of it yesterday, right? Like, all of a sudden you just don't like it now. Again, they might be searching for a reaction. They might be overtired, overstimulated from school. Try and unpack, what had happened prior to what you're seeing or the resistance that you're feeling from them. But again, I would continue reintroducing things, continue offering that thing. If they previously liked it before, I suspect they'll eventually come back around to it once they're done dealing with whatever's going on in their little mind at that time.
Yeah, I'm never quite sure if she's telling me the truth or not.
Yeah.
Somebody told you, heard that somewhere, and you may be missing a detail or two, but it's one of her favorite phrases.
They love to give us everything back.
They do. They really do. Okay, I want to dive into another big topic that I think is certainly happening quickly and can be a struggle in the second year of life, and that's really those behavioral changes. I remember quite fondly what some of those were for us. And as parents, they can be really hard, right? It can be certainly very frustrating. How do we as parents handle our child's developing into their own person? Any unwanted behaviors we're seeing, things like that?
So I think especially in this developmental stage where 12 to 24 months, keeping in mind what is happening during this year, they're going through so much, their entire body, they're going from taking maybe one step to running and climbing and jumping and doing all kinds of cool things and pushing their boundaries. They're going from, like Mike said, saying 1 or 2 words to having phrases and having 50 to 100 words. So their bodies and their brains are just bursting. So having that perspective of it, I think, can help, because if you think of everything that's going on, it can give you a little more patience at times. And then keeping in mind that they're going to explore boundaries. They can do a lot more. They can see a lot more. They can say a lot more, and they're going to tell you things. So they're trying to figure out that independence, but also needing help with things, but they don't necessarily want it. Not to say that the behaviors are not frustrating all the time. But, staying calm, like Mike has said before, not having a big response to those big behaviors because they're doing it they're trying to elicit a response from you. So if you're boring when they have those big behaviors, then they're probably not going to really care to do it as much. But if you give them that big praise for those wonderful behaviors, they're going to seek out that positive reinforcement.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, one of the things that I always found trickiest, especially with my oldest, because she did truly have great verbal communication. What I felt was pretty young or early on. She still had some of those behaviors. Biting was her thing. I mean, that was her thing, and it was so. I mean, I'm in early childhood. I know it's normal. I know it's appropriate. As a parent, wearing that different hat, it was still really hard. It was really hard to navigate that. My question here is, for a child that does have a pretty sufficient verbal language, should we expect to see less of these types of behaviors, or is it still evenly normal to expect to see these things happening?
Yeah, I would say it's still evenly normal, and it very much depends on their day, their amount of sleep that they got, if they took a nap at school, if they had enough to eat. There's so many factors that go into some of the behaviors that we see with children. But even, a kid with, 150 words compared to somebody with 50 words, like I'm going to expect them to have some of these temper tantrums, some of these kind of negative behaviors, just because that's something that they're going through. And if they're, sleep deprived or something like that, they're going to act out more. Until we can really kind of, regroup and get them the rest that they need, or get them the food that they need, or help them unpack their frustration that they're having. They might not be able to explain it to you in words that they can process or understand. But I think just helping them kind of, come back to their center and, calm them down and try and unpack what had been happening can be helpful. But yeah, they're still going to act out.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if their language is more developed and they're more developed in one area, emotionally, they're still 18 months or 15 months. So they're still going to have those tantrums and those acting out moments. They're little cave people that need to, integrate everything. So
absolutely, little cave people. That's a good way to explain it, I think. How have you seen, if at all, how have you seen COVID-19 impact some of the behaviors that maybe we're seeing as parents more frequently, or have you seen an impact at all?
I think with some language development, or kind of a baseline for a general group of kids, I think having them be exposed to other children who are going through the same developmental things, and in an environment that's really fostering some of this development, I think it's not quite as unnormal for me to see, or abnormal for me to see, kids that are just a little bit, behind or lower within the range of normal for the spectrum of kind of language development, because there is so much benefit to getting them out there and interacting with other kids, not only building their immune system with the colds that, both Megan and my kids have or are working through right now, but all of the kind of psychosocial developmental things that kids can do. It's just such a great environment for them to build some of those skills.
Absolutely. Dr. Lynch-Luby, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of kids, especially at this age, because they're the COVID babies. Socially, they're just a lot more social anxiety, a lot more separation anxiety from parents, and a lot more challenges for parents from that, because they were literally with them every day, every hour for weeks and months on end, which is wonderful and challenging in its own right.
Yeah. Any sort of advice, tips, tricks you would offer a family that maybe is going through a little bit of this right now, maybe some heightened social anxiety or, separation anxiety, things like that?
So slow transitions, I think, are always good when we're dealing with things like that. I always, encourage like library groups or play groups at the gym. Just to really slowly let them do things on their own time and not push them too much, because it may backfire and worsen the anxiety if you push them too much. Slow, introduction to family members, and, going out of the room first and then maybe leaving the house, so that way they're able to acclimate themselves and get used to it.
Once you are able to separate from them too at any of these groups, do your best to not go back prior to kind of that established time that you set for yourself, right? Like if it's daycare for 3 hours and that's what they expect to be there for 3 hours, even though they can't fully comprehend like what 3 hours is like. Try not to interrupt what their development of a pattern of normal is, because that can kind of set them back, and you're kind of working backwards from there. But yeah, try with continued exposures in safe environments to them, right? With grandparents, with people that they know, that can be helpful before, getting them right into a daycare setting for the first time, which can be overwhelming.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to ask one more follow-up question here, because I know we focused a lot on like the behaviors, right? I think that's the biggest thing that sort of stands out to us as parents. But I also know that this second year is really, there's a lot of them just becoming their own little person, right? Their own little human. And we want that, right? We want them to be able to thrive and be successful as their own little person. You know, as they develop that language, as they get new skills and things like that, we see that level of independence heighten. And sometimes maybe it's not expressed as we would want it to, right? I was camping this past weekend and my nephew wanted some space. And he looked, I had asked him a question and he looked right at me and he said, "Could you just leave me alone?" And sometimes our reaction is to be like, "Oh my God, that was so rude." But I looked at him and I said, "You know what? Actually, yes, I can. Thank you for asking, and I will do what you need, right? I will give you that space." It can be hard to recognize that, okay, they're really, maybe they didn't present it the best way, right? But they're asking for something. There's a need that they need met. Anything in terms of how we can handle that, right? To sort of fight the urge to be like, "Oh my God, don't say that. That's rude," right? Because we want them to be independent and be able to speak up for themselves.
Absolutely. No, and I think what you said, just not reacting and not making too big of a deal out of it, because that's what he felt. And it's hard because they're very concrete thinkers. They don't really have those nuances when they're little. So just, it's like taking it at face value, essentially, and not having a big reaction to it, which is going to make them feel, upset and then more self-conscious about it. And bravo to him for expressing how he felt.
That's really funny.
And I think too, after a situation that doesn't go exactly how we would like it to, right? If we have, maybe a bit of a temper when we're responding to something, we're tired from our day, we're sleep deprived too. I think there's so much value in apologizing to your child, right? Like, we're not perfect. It is important for them to hear that from us and show them what, apologizing looks like, right? Model what we want to see from them later on in life. And give yourself some grace too. Like, raising kids is tough. It is the most fun thing you could ever do, the most rewarding thing, but it is the hardest thing you can also do too. So give yourself some grace. If you mess up in how you wanted to respond to something, they're going to give you so many other chances to practice it again. And then also too, I think unpacking what was going on in that situation for your child once they've calmed down, right? When they're in a temper tantrum or they're like losing it, they can't process what's going on. They can't connect the dots as to, "Oh, I'm upset because you gave me a red crayon instead of a blue one," right? Like, that's probably not why you're throwing your extreme tantrum right now. Once they calm down, I think try and revisiting and kind of unpacking that with them. And, "Hey, what was going on at that time? Could you tell me a little bit more about that?" And whatever terms or words they can use. It can be helpful. It's not going to eliminate the tantrums, but it can be helpful for them to start to connect those dots as, "Oh, like, I see that I was upset for this, and now I acted this." It's a start. It's not going to fix everything, but it's a good start.
Yeah, I love that you brought up giving us as parents some grace, right? It's, we don't always do it perfectly. I by no means do it all perfectly. And I remember the first time I really sort of started to lean into that with my girls and be like, "Listen, like, as grown-ups, we make mistakes too. Like, look, I also spilt my cup of milk or my water, or, maybe I didn't react in the best way that I should have." And I remember my oldest being like, "Mommy, wait, grown-ups make mistakes?" And I'm like, "Yes, honey, like, we all make mistakes, we learn from them and we try to be better going forward, but it's a part of being human." All right, we're going to go into, oh, go ahead. Sorry, did I?
Oh, no, you're good.
Okay. We're going to go into another poll question, and I'm very excited for this one as well. For anybody watching, please put your thoughts in the comments there. What is your favorite playtime activity with your toddler? What is your favorite playtime activity with your toddler? As we go into, as we gather those responses and things like that, I do have a question for you all to really kind of go into our last topic, which is the topic of playtime activities, right? Playing with our children, giving them safe spaces to play, etc. Certainly safety concerns as those young toddlers get a little bit more independent, perhaps a little bit braver and riskier, to become more mobile, all of that stuff. What are some of your best tips on how to keep them safe?
I think making whatever environment you can, kind of thinking through what could harm my child in this situation, right? Whether it's a sharp table corner, whether it's something on the ground that they'll almost certainly put in their mouth because they don't think through those cause and effect things. Again, just try and visually scan whatever area they're playing in and try and eliminate some of the risk factors that you can. They're still going to find a way to fall down and get hurt. Like, it's inevitable, right? That's part of the learning process for them. But I think just kind of visually scanning wherever you are and try and make it as safe as you can at the time. Thinking through kind of household stuff. So baby gates, tops and bottoms of stairs. Your kid is going to tell you that they're the best at walking up and down the stairs or jumping up and down the stairs. They're not. Have those baby gates to remind them, like, hey, this is something we can't do on our own, because they're going to want to do it. And then again, it gives you a little more peace of mind too, when maybe you don't have eyes on your child, that you still know they're in a safe environment. Having your cleaning supplies and medications locked and stored out of reach in baby-proof cabinets. We see so many, ingestions, again, because kids don't understand. I see this purple bottle of something, right? Like, it's visually appealing to them, so they're going to want to explore that. And if they pop the cap off and unfortunately take some of the medication, that there could be some serious consequences. So making sure that those cleaning supplies and medications are stored safely. And then make sure you have a poison control number. Write it down somewhere, have it stored in your phone just in case something happens. It's 1-800-222-1222. They are a phenomenal resource if you ever find yourself in a situation where you're worried about an ingestion or something like that. Heavy furniture too is another one to make sure that you have secured. Your kid's going to want to climb it. They're going to want to pull out the drawers from the dresser and climb up it, and it could potentially tip over. And some of those have some weight to them, and there's been some kids pretty severely injured with that. So making sure they're appropriately secured to the walls so that they reduce the risk of them potentially falling over and hurting your child. Again, making sure the floor is clear of small objects, no plastic bags lying around, no balloons lying on the floor. From like an electrical standpoint, all electrical outlets should be covered with baby-proof things. There shouldn't be kind of extension cords easily accessible for them to pull out and kind of explore what that cool looking thing in the wall does. It hurts. I promise you it hurts. You don't need to find that on your own.
Take my word for it. It hurts.
having baby-proof doorknobs on bathrooms, on basement entrances, exits of the house. Places you don't want them to go on their own, I would throw a baby-proof kind of doorknob thing on them. There's plenty of them out there, some are relatively affordable online. The brand doesn't necessarily matter as long as it does the job of preventing your child from being able to easily get out of the house or get into an area you don't want them to. Cordless blinds are another one that I don't think about them too commonly, but if you think about it, right, if it's hanging down, your kid can play with it, get it looped around their neck and harm themselves that way too. Again, we talked a little bit about kind of the corners of objects in your house. The coffee table, if it's pointed, it might look beautiful before you had kids. Now you have kids, they're running around, being crazy, having fun. They could fall and bump their head into it. So try and get maybe one of those corner covers. They make plenty of those like little plastic ones too, to cover up those sharp points. I think one that I saw a lot in training was hot liquids. Be conscientious of where you're leaving your hot coffee, your cup of noodles. Cup of noodles was always the worst thing that we saw. Kids get so many burns from them. I don't know why. But again, any hot liquids, make sure you're storing it, out of reach. Don't leave it right on the edge of the counter because your kid can potentially get up there and dump it on themselves. So they can get burned pretty bad from that. Your hot water heater, again, not one that we think about too often, but run your hot water on high. If it's reading out higher than 120, turn your tank down a little bit. Now that your kid's more mobile and able to climb and potentially turn on the water by themselves, you don't want them to accidentally turn on the hot water and scald themselves that way. So make sure that prevent that from happening just by turning your hot water heater down. Lastly, car safety. Making sure your child is appropriately fitted in a rear-facing car seat as long as they can until they've reached the weight and height restrictions from the manufacturer. Safest to be in the middle in the back seat if you can. If not, still the back seat is safer. And remember to check that seatbelt every single time they get in. We might be talking on the phone, get distracted with our Starbucks order or something out. Take 1 or 2 seconds. Make sure your kid's safe in the back seat because we don't want anything bad to happen to them ever.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some really good ones. Some going through being like, yep, we did that. We do that. We might still do that, right? Those sort of things. So let's lean into these play activities, right? And what at home, what we're doing with our young children to keep them engaged and active and developing all of that. What are some examples of appropriate toddler play activities that parents can participate in at home?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be, and again, sort of with the thought of language development, it doesn't have to be anything, crazy or expensive. It could be as simple as just going outside and, naming things that we're seeing, right? Like coming up with a story for our kids that you see a butterfly, you talk about, what do you think the butterfly's doing? Or where do you think it's going? Are its friends nearby? What are its friends' names? Whatever you want it to be, create a narrative with them, and have some of that back and forth play with them. And that can be enough oftentimes too, right? And you still have the benefit of them being outside, being in nature, getting some of those exposures that way too. So I love outdoor play. That's my favorite toddler play activity. I'm going to chime in early on that one.
That did come up in our poll. So
yes,
yes, there are some that feel the same.
Puzzles. I love puzzles with like the animals on them too, because it gives you a chance, again, to work on their language development with them. You have the little cow, you put it in the cow spot. What sound does a cow make? Or I wonder what sound a cow makes. They can practice their moo, whatever it is. So you're teaching them so much while you're still playing, and really just dictating kind of what's going on. Again, it can be just narrating what they're doing, like Dr. Lynch-Luby was saying, right? They're getting so much benefit from that, and you're having some play activities with them too.
Yeah, I think physical play too is so important. Kids are physical beings. They're learning, they need to develop the coordination. They need to develop their strength and confidence in themselves. And they have so much energy to burn off that we can avoid a lot of behavioral issues and sleep issues if they get enough kind of time in physical activity during the day too, like that unstructured, just go run and play and climb and do.
Absolutely. You guys hit on several that came back in the poll. Imaginary play was one of them, dress up, hide and seek, reading, drawing, being outside, and then just singing songs and playing with them. So you guys hit on a lot of those there. I do want to ask, so Dr. Lynch-Luby, you just mentioned being like physically active, right? Let's talk a little bit about rough and tumble play, right? Is this something to be expected in this second year of life to start to see that rough and tumble play developing? And how do we approach it?
I think yes. They're again exploring their boundaries, exploring their abilities, and they are, impulsive, and they're just going to go and they're going to do. So making sure, like Mike said, that they're safe, that the environment is safe, and there's limited things that they can hurt themselves on. Kids are going to get injured. Unfortunately, it's just going to happen. But it's also going to teach them. Hopefully, it'll be minor, and it'll teach them what the boundary is and what they can do. It may instill a little more confidence of, wow, I did that, which is always cool too. So I think the rough and tumble play is definitely expected, but setting that boundary of, okay, if somebody's starting to get injured or intentionally injured, we need to reel it in and keep them safe.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely. They're getting so much in that type of play that I wouldn't want to take it away from them. Again, trying to minimize the situations where they could potentially hurt themselves. But this is another one. Give yourself some grace, right? Your kid is going to get hurt as they're developing, right? Like it's not, and as much as I would love to avoid my kids from being hurt ever, there's plenty of benefit in them learning from little minor injuries or minor things that might happen to them that kind of cause an effect that I wouldn't want to take that experience away from them, again, as long as they're safe afterwards.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. I know that can be a big one, knowing, when to stop it, when to let it keep going. If they have the communication ability to stop it themselves if necessary, etc. I think another big topic that often comes up is the idea of independent play, right? When can we expect young children to be playing independently and maybe versus having primarily like parent play or group play?
Yeah, I think as gray of an area as I can give you, I would say during this time period, right? Like every kid's on their own timeline. Every kid has, their own things that they prefer. Between, 1 to 2 years, I would expect some kids, at least some of the time, to have some independent play. Again, it might only be 30 seconds to a minute, right? They really might crave that interaction with their parents. They might not see their parents too much during the day. So that's probably another factor that can play into it too. So yeah, as far as, how much can they have, as long as they're having some interactive play, eye contact things, independent play, I don't tend to worry about. And I expect kids are going to have a wide range of what is normal for their independent play, but they should have some, I would expect during this time.
Yeah, and I think as parents, if we encourage the independent play too, let them lead, ask what they're thinking, ask them to start doing something when we're playing with them and not constantly like making the situation and setting the scene for everything. It can help them too to develop that skill.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both so much. We are getting close to the end, so I'm just going to open it up quickly. I do have one more question for you guys, but I want to just go ahead and mention that if there are any questions that anybody wants to ask Dr. Parisa or Dr. Lynch-Luby, please put them into our chat. We'll be happy to lead a little bit of a Q&A session here in just a minute. But before we do, we asked everybody else what their favorite playtime activity was with their toddler. You both have toddlers. What is your favorite playtime activity to do at home with your toddlers?
So I grew up on 36-acre farm, so I was outside all the time and playing in the dirt and probably eating more dirt than my parents knew about. So I love anything outside, right? And again, it doesn't have to be anything super structured. I think earlier today I took my daughter outside. We just walked around the yard and we were looking at leaves and talking about butterflies. I like riding the lawnmower with my kids too, as safely as you can be, right? Like incorporating them into some of your kind of daily task or weekly tasks that you might need to do. They get so much joy out of it as well. Again, as long as it's safe, think about incorporating them into some of that yard work too.
Yeah, being outside with them is so fun. With my little one, she just turned 2. Letting her read a book is one of my favorite things to do now because she'll look at it, she looks at the pictures, she points everything out to me and names things and just talks and talks and talks, and it's so much fun. So watching their little minds develop is just amazing.
It is. It happens super fast, and it's just so fascinating. Yes, Dr. Parisa, I will echo that. There is something so fun about riding the lawnmower in the yard for children. Safely, yep. Absolutely, but it is at 5 and 7 still a favorite for both of my girls. I'm sure someday when mowing the lawn is a chore they have, it won't be as fun anymore.
All enjoyment is gone now.
We're enjoying it while we can, right?
Yep.
We do have a couple of questions, and we'll keep taking those in as they come. One of them is what to do when your child always wants the same food for meals.
I think,
yeah.
So again, offering something similar or offering that food on occasion is fine, but really a little bit of that and then everything else. So that way you make sure that you're kind of broadening their horizons. If you play into the pickiness all the time, they're just going to develop, this is what I eat and this is what I can have. And if I don't eat anything else, then I'm going to get this. Kids are not going to let themselves go hungry. They're going to eat when they're hungry. So if you are, don't try to starve them, but if you're constantly giving them a good variety and you're giving them a little bit of what they want and not encouraging them to be so picky, it'll definitely help them to broaden their horizons.
And do your best to sort of what Megan was talking about as well, or Dr. Lynch-Luby, try not to make other meals for your kids, right? Like what you're making for dinner is what you're having for dinner. Again, if they don't want to eat it right now, that's fine. When they get hungry later and ask for food, offer that same food again. It will take time for them to sort of connect the dots there that, oh, I used to be able to complain that I was hungry and mom or dad would give me my granola bar or something that I wanted. Be consistent amongst the caregivers who are with them, because they will find the person who is a little bit harder for them to not want to offer that snack that they prefer. Be on the same page, offer what you're having for dinner. If they're not hungry now, they can eat that later. That's absolutely fine.
So I feel like you're speaking right to me as you say that. So we are talking about the second year of life, but for some parents that maybe didn't do some of these things totally right during that second year and we're past that, is it too late? Is there a way to sort of bring it back when it comes to those picky eaters or getting them to eat the same meal that's being served for everybody for dinner?
It's never too late.
Never.
You can always do it. I think especially for older kids, I think including them in meal preparing, grocery shopping, developing the menu for the week, if they're interested in it and it's exciting for them, they're a lot more likely to try it. So I think for older kids, that can be a really good strategy too. At my house, we really like boring snacks. So, if you didn't eat dinner, okay, you can have a banana or you can have a cheese stick. Like that's all you get to eat. You don't get anything else. And it's just a boring thing that you don't really want, but they'll eat it. So it encourages them to eat what we had for dinner instead of the cheese stick.
Yeah. And if you haven't sort of practiced this some early on, it'll probably take a little bit longer as your kids have developed this pattern. It can still be corrected or redirected in their mind, but yeah, it's probably going to take a little bit longer.
So I've got a long road ahead of me. That's all right. My next question sort of shifts gears a little bit. Well, you know what? We'll go with this one first. So this one is, again, on the topic of being picky eaters. Do you recommend giving vitamins to help sort of supplement maybe some of what they're missing?
Yeah, I think depending on how picky of an eater your child is, right? Like if they're eating a pretty well-balanced diet, they should be getting just about everything that they need from their food. We're both in Northeast Ohio right now, so potentially with the exception of vitamin D, because we don't see the sun very often. It's maybe like, what, 1 or 2 months a year, Megan? But yeah, with the exception of vitamin D, they should be getting just about everything else from their food. There's no harm to a multivitamin if they're taking it as, you know, prescribed or as it's written on the bottle. I always tell my parents, if it's going to be a struggle to get them to take it, it's probably not worth it. But I don't see any harm in doing it. So I usually recommend it to all my families.
Yeah, I think parents perceive kids to be eating a lot less than they actually are. So they're getting some form of every food group in there at some degree during the week. They're probably fine. Vitamins are fine, but for the most part, you're going to pee out most of it. So.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. All right. We're going to go away from the food topic. I've got a couple of other questions for you all. Thinking about this second year of life, when is it an appropriate time to think about the crib transition?
Megan, or Dr. Lynch-Luby, I'll let you go with your first response because I know what it is and I love it.
Not in the second year of life. Keep them in the crib as long as humanly possible. In my opinion, closer to 3 is a good time to transition when they're, you know, a little more rational, a little more trustworthy. This age is just so impulsive and wild that I would not consider it at this time. Even if they start crawling out of the crib and there's a serious safety issue with it, if they crawl out and you put them back in and they crawl out and you put them back in, they're eventually going to stop crawling out. It's that exploring a boundary. So if you're able to, you know, stop that, then you can keep them in the crib. I did see one strategy of lowering the crib mattress all the way down to the floor instead of that lowest level, because it's still going to be contained and safe if they are crawling out. So I thought that was great advice because that keeps them safe and keeps them in the crib longer too.
Absolutely.
I think we had a sleep sack for my son who started crawling out right before our daughter was born. It kind of like, I don't actually know the name. This is not good advice that I'm handing out, but there's one that like kind of kept their legs a little closer together so they couldn't use them to really like climb up the sides of the crib. But there are plenty of, you know, safe sleep sacks and stuff out there that might help in a situation like this, where if they're just with a blanket and they're kind of PJs, it's probably easier for them to be able to climb out. So there's some other things we can do as far as how we're dressing them for bed that might help delay this a little bit too.
Absolutely. And the last one that we have for you all is any suggestions for introducing a younger sibling to a toddler. So bringing a new baby home.
Prep as much as you can. Prep your little one and whatever sort of understanding they might have for what's happening. They won't fully comprehend what it is, and they might still ask you to send it back when it comes, and that's okay. They don't understand exactly, you know, what's happening. Finding books that talk about new baby, you know, having them be part of picking out clothes for your new baby when you're going shopping. Again, sort of like the meal time that Dr. Lynch-Luby was talking about, incorporate them into it. And when you're talking about your new baby coming, you know, talk excitedly about it. They'll really catch on to that excitement. And it's amazing too, just seeing how they might shift their understanding of it too, with some of that kind of positive reinforcement and positive talk. Another plug for reading here, because there's so many benefits to reading. Find that good book that talks about new babies so that they comprehend what baby is. And then you're kind of revisiting the subject over and over again too.
Absolutely.
And I think realistically prepare them too, because I think a lot of the times we're like, oh, you're going to have a best friend. It's going to be so fun. But you bring them home and they do nothing but cry and sleep. So, you know,
they're not very playful.
No, you know, it's going to take a lot of time, but we love you, and you know, make that extra time for your older kiddo too. Make sure you're having that special time with them, even if it's 5-10 minutes when the newborn's sleeping. So that way they still feel special and they still feel loved. And having other caregivers come in, you know, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and spend special time with them too can be really helpful.
Yeah, I remember bringing my youngest home, and just not being able to do everything I'd been doing. And they're pretty close in age. And my oldest Amelia was just going to be turning 2. So they're really close in age. And so that quality time, it could have just been like having her nighttime snack on the floor, like just sitting with her, not the baby was good. She was tended to, she was taken care of. And so letting her be, and then just sort of, that was just our time to spend together, even if it was just that 5 minutes, and certainly helped a lot. I do have one more that's come in. It does get super tricky. This one is a big one. This one, I feel like this is where my parenting trauma, like pacifiers and bottles. How do we, like, is it time during the second year to start taking those things away? Any tips to make it easier? Because it's hard.
Yeah, definitely time within the second year. As far as the reason we don't want pacifiers long-term is kind of to potentially mess up teeth. So if they're starting to have more teeth, I think even some people will have their children get rid of their pacifiers by like 6 months. Again, that's way too early in my mind, because there's so much benefit to them and kind of a calming technique between 1 to 2 years of age, depending on what's going on. If there's a big transition at home or you just move, like, you probably don't want to do it during that time, because that's going to be kind of a comfort thing for them. But what we really don't want to do is to them, potentially mess up their kind of tooth development from that. We like the Binky Fairy one. I don't know what Dr. Lynch-Luby used, but telling her kids kind of slowly removing all the binkies that we had in their bed, that they'd be able to crawl around at night and find, and then saying, oh, the Binky Fairy is going to be coming soon, and replace your binky with X, Y, or Z, whatever it is, whatever you come up with your kid that they like, so that it's not necessarily a negative thing. They're getting something in place of it.
Yeah, I think, again, like slow transitions from these things. The bottle, I usually by 18 months recommend getting off of. Usually when kids transition from like formula or breast milk to milk, that's a good time to start phasing out bottles. With the one before bed being the last one, because that's the most challenging one. And pacifiers, I think, still, Mike, is a quick transition one. But, getting rid of it during the day, getting rid of it at nap time, and then slowly transitioning them to get rid of it overnight. Or giving it to the Binky Fairy. I have heard that one as well. And honestly, I'm still working on getting my little one off of her, so I can't judge anybody.
All the good luck to you. I remember getting rid of my oldest, and she was super attached to it. And it definitely was harder on me as a parent than it was her. She is not traumatized. She is great. But I remember so clearly my youngest sort of just slowly, just by herself, becoming disinterested. And I remember looking at my husband one night being like, just don't even give it to her. Let's see what she does. Because I didn't want her to feel so connected that I'd have to have the heart. Yeah. That for me was harder than the nighttime bottle. I mean, she was heartbroken at first. It was really tough.
It's a hard thing to get rid of. It's their comfort.
And they only make it so hard on you because they love you so much. I think just remind yourself that too.
I tell myself, yes, it is only hard because you love me that much. Well, thank you guys both so much. This has been a great conversation. It's certainly brought me back to some of, the toddler years when I was living in them. And I'm not that far out of them, but it's just fun to relive and remember what I had experienced. And I thank you both again for your time and just chatting with me tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having us. It was great to be back.
Thank you. This was so fun, Danielle.
Absolutely. As we wrap up, I do want to remind everybody that Zest is our official medical education partner here at the Nest. And I hope after the second time they will come back again and join us for future episodes, more fun topics, lots more to discover about those quick childhood years and all the fun that's happening there. To learn more about Zest Pediatrics, you can visit their website, www.zestpeds.com. In the meantime, I'm very excited to share that we have our next Nest Builders event planned. This event is going to be on November 14th. It'll be the same time, 8 p.m. For this event, we will be joined by Michelle Tovar with Practical Life Parenting. You can go ahead and sign up and learn more about this event by visiting www.thenestschool.com/nestbuilders. And until next time, have a wonderful night and thank you for joining us.